From the opening moments, the interview crackled with electricity. Dan Bongino, with his signature intensity, leaned forward, voice raised, eyes blazing as he began pressing Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on controversial allegations and legislative decisions. The tone was unmistakably confrontational. Bongino's questions became more aggressive, each word intended to corner and intimidate. Jasmine's jaw tightened briefly, but she remained composed, listening. Bongino's accusatory delivery shifted into a full-on tirade, a crescendo of interruptions. "You're misleading the public," he shouted. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. Cameras captured the rising tension, mics picking up the grind of voices colliding. Yet, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. For every barbed question, she paused. The silence lifted the weight of Bongino's aggression. Viewers sensed. This was more than an interview. It was a test. Then Jasmine found her moment. Calm, deliberate, she leaned in and spoke one sentence that rewrote the narrative. "Let's focus on facts, not theatrics," she said, voice steady, unwavering. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't an apology or deflection. It was a reset. Bongino, mid-rant, froze. The atmosphere shifted. Her words peeled back the showmanship, shining a spotlight on the truth rather than the tension. The hosts exchanged looks. The cameras lingered on Bongino's frown. Jasmine continued speaking, but every listener remembered that one line, the centering of substance over spectacle. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply drew the line. Words should inform, not inflame. Social media erupted instantly. Clips highlighting Jasmine's calm retort spread across platforms, accumulating millions of views: TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Commentators praised her poise. She turned the energy around with one simple phrase. News outlets covered the exchange as a lesson in conflict de-escalation. #FactsNotHetrics began trending, accompanying posts lauding her for elevating the conversation. Analysts weighed in. She used restraint as power. Bongino became the pundit overshadowed by a congressional freshman who spoke with clarity, not chaos. Her reaction became a case study for leadership under pressure. Someone refusing to play the noise game, choosing instead to stand firm on truth. In the days that followed, Jasmine remained measured. She declined sensational interviews, opting instead for a clarifying statement, reaffirming her commitment to policy over provocation, urging journalists to elevate substance. Bongino issued no public response to the viral clip. The moment became the talking point, not the battle. Journalists invited Crockett back to other forums, not to rehash conflict, but to lead conversation on meaningful issues. She accepted, but on her terms. At a moderated town hall, she addressed the exchange with compassion, emphasizing that civility doesn't concede strength, and that political leadership demands dialogue rooted in respect. The comparison between her restraint and Bongino's aggression became a lens through which many assessed modern media culture weeks later. Her influence echoed far beyond the studio. College leadership courses began referencing her response. News anchors called it a masterclass in public composure. Community leaders posted her clip as inspiration for holding firm under pressure. Even some journalists reframed their own approach, seeking clarity over confrontation. Bongino's style, once praised for toughness, came under scrutiny. Viewers questioned whether causing a scene was truly persuasive. Jasmine Crockett's calm response didn't just diffuse a moment, it reshaped how people expected discourse to feel. In an era drowned in noise, her one sentence offered a model: dignity in disagreement, facts over fury, leadership without theatrics. Jasmine Crockett's viral moment didn't just ripple through the digital sphere, it began influencing real conversations inside Congress. Colleagues from both sides of the aisle privately approached her, some offering respect, others seeking advice on how she had managed to maintain composure under pressure. She smiled politely, often repeating the same thing: "It wasn't about me, it was about the truth." Invitations poured in from universities, civic organizations, and even international media. She declined many, prioritizing her district and the work she believed in, but she knew now her voice carried farther than before. Meanwhile, a shift was unfolding in the public's perception of who truly held power during political exchanges. It wasn't always the loudest, the most famous, or the most aggressive. Sometimes, it was the one who refused to be pulled into chaos. Bongino, once known for dominating conversations, now found himself remembered in this exchange not for what he said, but for how someone else responded. And as clips of Jasmine's moment continued circulating, subtitled in multiple languages, played in classrooms, boardrooms, and churches, it became clear that one calm sentence had cut deeper than any insult ever could, and had permanently shifted the energy of political discourse. As the media whirlwind surrounding the interview continued, Jasmine Crockett chose not to capitalize on her newfound fame. Instead, she quietly returned to her work, pushing legislation on housing equity, healthcare access, and voter protection. But everywhere she went, people now stopped her not just to talk politics, but to thank her for the example she had set. A grandmother in Georgia told her, "You reminded my granddaughter that strength isn't always loud." A college student in Chicago said, "You made me rethink how I handle conflict." Jasmine took it all in with quiet humility, but she understood the responsibility that came with the moment. Behind closed doors, she mentored young staffers, teaching them that tone mattered, that silence had power, and that dignity was a political force in itself. Meanwhile, media outlets that had once dismissed her as a rookie or underestimated her now sought her opinion on major national issues. She never gloated, never referenced the viral moment herself, but its impact lingered. Bongino, for his part, gave a few follow-up interviews attempting to reframe the incident, but the public wasn't buying it. People had seen the contrast for themselves, and it spoke louder than any spin. What Jasmine had demonstrated in those few seconds wasn't just political savvy, it was emotional intelligence weaponized for truth. And that became the new benchmark in a political world long addicted to noise. As weeks turned into months, the moment between Dan Bongino and Jasmine Crockett continued to resonate across platforms far beyond politics. Influencers on TikTok used her words as audio for empowerment montages. Teachers played the clip during classroom discussions on rhetoric, tone, and conflict resolution. Mental health advocates cited her response as a real-time example of emotional regulation in high-stress situations. Even corporate leaders began referencing her poise in training seminars on leadership under pressure. Jasmine, however, remained grounded. In private, she often joked with her team, "Imagine going viral just for acting like an adult." But deep down, she knew that what had unfolded was about more than just behavior, it had tapped into a hunger for integrity. Voters had grown exhausted by performative outrage, constant yelling, and staged outrage cycles. They wanted to believe again that calm could be powerful, that facts still mattered, and that leadership could look like grace. The clip of her response played again on the anniversary of the incident, and this time, the framing was different. News anchors didn't treat it as a clash, they treated it as a turning point. Political commentators, even those ideologically opposed to her, admitted, "That moment made me think." And in a country often splintered by division, Jasmine Crockett's restraint became more than a reaction. It became a cultural reference point, a new model for the tone America craved. In the months following the interview, Jasmine Crockett's influence began manifesting in unexpected ways. Young political hopefuls referenced her in campaign speeches, calling her the calm in the storm. Nonprofit leaders began inviting her to speak not about policies, but about presence, how one composed moment could disarm a room full of tension. On Capitol Hill, staffers affectionately dubbed her the still voice, a quiet nod to her ability to silence even the loudest voices through calm clarity. What struck observers most was how she didn't need to change who she was to command respect. She had simply chosen not to descend to the chaos around her. Dan Bongino, who had thrived for years on controversy and fiery exchanges, seemed momentarily eclipsed by the cultural ripple Jasmine had created. Though he continued his media rounds and leaned into his trademark style, the public had seen the contrast too vividly to forget it. He tried to reassert control over the narrative, but it was too late. Jasmine's response had already become a teaching tool, a social media emblem, and, most powerfully, a mirror held up to a political landscape addicted to shouting. Her story became a quiet revolution, not by redefining the rules of engagement, but by reminding the nation that dignity, when chosen deliberately, was not weakness. It was strategy, and it worked. By the end of the year, Jasmine Crockett's rise was undeniable. She had been featured in major publications, not for scandal or sensationalism, but for composure, intellect, and impact. Universities invited her to give commencement speeches, while editorial boards praised her as a fresh voice of leadership in a tired political era. And still, Jasmine stayed focused on her core mission, advocating for underserved communities, pushing meaningful legislation, and mentoring the next generation. Her interaction with Dan Bongino, once just a viral clip, became a chapter in a larger narrative about the future of American discourse. It reminded people that decency could be revolutionary. The moment wasn't about silencing anyone, it was about reminding the world that composure could carry as much weight as confrontation. As the noise of political media carried on around her, Jasmine remained a steady presence, increasingly called upon not just as a congresswoman but as a symbol of a different kind of strength. The story of how she responded that day lived on, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. And in an age where authenticity was rare, that made her unforgettable. As the political landscape shifted with the coming election season, Jasmine Crockett's calm response to Dan Bongino became more than just a viral moment, it became a litmus test. Voters, especially independents and younger generations, began referencing it in town halls and online discussions as a turning point in how they wanted their leaders to behave. Political analysts noted that the incident signaled a broader cultural fatigue with aggression for spectacle's sake. Crockett was increasingly seen not only as a symbol of resilience but as a leader ushering in a new standard, one where clarity outshines chaos. Meanwhile, her legislative record gained more attention. While media had once zeroed in on her tone, they now looked more deeply into her substance. Bills passed, communities served, bridges built across the aisle. She was even floated as a potential candidate for higher office, not because she courted power, but because she proved she could wield it responsibly. Interviews with her rarely mentioned the Bongino incident anymore. When they did, it was only to highlight how a single, measured moment could ripple outward to change how an entire nation thinks about leadership. And for Jasmine, it was never about the virality. It was about proving, even in the harshest spotlight, that dignity always has the final word. Behind the scenes, Jasmine Crockett continued to move with the same authenticity that had earned her national attention. She didn't hire flashy new PR firms or pivot to a rehearsed image, she simply stayed grounded in her work. Her staff described her as calm, strategic, and deeply invested in her constituents. When asked in a later interview how she stayed composed during the Bongino confrontation, she responded simply, "I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was trying to hold on to my values." That mindset resonated deeply in a time when political battles were often reduced to sound bites and insults. Her approach inspired a wave of younger leaders, many of whom cited her moment of grace under fire as the reason they believed politics could still be honorable. Town hall meetings began to feel different. Constituents didn't just ask about policies, they asked how to stay grounded, how to lead without rage, how to disagree without dehumanizing. In time, Jasmine Crockett's calm wasn't seen as a fluke, it became a model. And the viral clip that once shocked the internet slowly faded in relevance, not because it was forgotten, but because the legacy it sparked had grown far larger than a single interview. Political talk shows tried repeatedly to recreate the viral moment by inviting Jasmine Crockett back for more fiery interviews, hoping lightning would strike twice. But she politely declined most of them, choosing instead to focus on meaningful conversations, town hall appearances, and policy-driven dialogues. Her refusal to engage in the spectacle frustrated some hosts who thrived on conflict, but it also solidified her image as a leader unwilling to perform for clicks. Behind closed doors, even members of the opposition began to express respect for her. "She's tough, but she listens," one senior senator was quoted saying anonymously. Meanwhile, Jasmine continued advocating for education reform and criminal justice transparency, frequently working across party lines. That balance, firm values with open ears, made her a political rarity. Students wrote her letters, activists invited her to speak, and even international press picked up her story as a model of American political decorum. What began as a tense encounter on live television had unexpectedly rewritten her trajectory. While others chased fame, she chased impact. And as the years went on, that single viral moment became a footnote in the larger story of a woman who quietly, steadily, changed the tone of American politics without ever raising her voice.